The courthouse doors hissed closed behind him, but they didn't shut out the sound. Not really. The murmur followed soft, electric, like static rolling off concrete. Cameras snapped, questions were shouted, but Diddy didn't flinch. Not this time. His gait was slower now, not because of defeat, but because there was nowhere left to run. The guards flanked him with professional distance, but even they carried the unspoken shift. This wasn't a defendant under protection anymore. Was a man walking inside the shadow of something larger than verdicts? He reached the black SUV, waiting at the curb, and for a moment, just before the door opened, he turned his head back, not to the cameras, not to the crowd, but to the building, the place where it all collapsed. Then he ducked inside, door closed, silence. But the silence didn't hold. By the time his vehicle pulled out into traffic, the leaks had already begun. Journalists had their headlines pre-written. Courtroom sketch artists were rushing final strokes. An assistant U.S. attorney had slipped a note to a reporter outside. Name, circled in red, Malik Rayner. And just like that, the next fire caught. Malik had been quiet since week 2. A former security chief, former fixer, former ghost. He hadn't been called to testify, and now people were wondering why. His name had surfaced once briefly on a list of subpoenaed witnesses. Then it disappeared. But that night, a new file emerged, an encrypted packet sent anonymously to 3 major news outlets. It contained time-stamped footage, messages, and a voice memo, all tied to Malik. And what it revealed wasn't just damaging, it was nuclear. Inside the Department of Justice, lights stayed on late. The prosecutor from Courtomelli Johnson was pulled from her office mid-sentence and handed a printed transcript. "You need to read this now," her supervisor said. She read, then she called the judge. Then she called the FBI. Malik hadn't just known about the contract buried in Diddy's files, he helped draft it. Worse, he'd acted on it. Payments to shell firms. Threats to witnesses. A shadow campaign run, not just to hide evidence, but to control people. That same night, federal agents knocked on a door in Fort Lee, New Jersey. Apartment 5E, no lights on. No answer. Inside, the apartment was stripped, furniture gone. Electronics, wiped, a single paper shredder still warm to the touch. Malik was gone. The next morning, Diddy sat in a private residence outside the city. Not his. A friend's. What was left of his legal team gathered at a long table, faces pale and drained. Phones buzzed. Notifications stacked. One of them slid a tablet across the table. He vanished. The lawyer said, he ran. And now they think he ran with more than paper. Diddy stared at the screen. The news site had already updated the headline. Malik Rayner, on the run. Key figure in suppression plot disappears overnight. He didn't blink. He just asked one thing. Did he leave anything behind? They hesitated. Then another screen slid across. This one showed a Dropbox folder newly created, already being mirrored by 3 newsrooms and a federal server. The title of the folder said it all. Insurance, if I don't make it inside, were over 100 files, contracts, audio, signed NDAs, wire transfers. One video, time-stamped in 2019, showed Diddy in a private lounge, speaking with executives' names redacted, but voices recognizable, discussing something called asset reversal strategy. Not just PR manipulation, not just witness tampering, but alleged blackmail networks, reputational leverage plans, and hush money pipelines reaching deeper than anyone had imagined. The lawyers didn't speak. They didn't have to. This wasn't just another scandal now. It was organized, intentional, federal. By noon, the U.S. Attorney's Office held a press conference, not about a verdict, about a new investigation. This time, the charges weren't just about what happened in nightclubs or hotel rooms. They were about obstruction, racketeering, conspiracy. This time, Diddy wasn't being accused of hiding the truth. He was being accused of building a system to bury it. The press conference ended without applause. No crowd, no media scrum cheering, or just the dull clicking of camera shutters and a wall of microphones picking up the prosecutor's final sentence. No one is above the process, not when the process speaks louder than the person. Behind that podium, in the heart of Lower Manhattan, federal law had done something rare. It hadn't just accused, it pointed to the architecture of power itself, the system behind the man. And now that system had a name. The reversal network. That phrase, buried in one of Malik's recovered memos, became the pulse of a new media storm. News anchors called it a shadow apparatus. Twitter called it proof. Congress called for hearings. And the Department of Justice, for the first time in over a decade, unsealed the rarest kind of indictment. A RICO charge leveled at a celebrity empire. This wasn't just a public fall, it was a federal collapse. Inside the Brooklyn brownstone, where Diddy had taken refuge, silence settled like ash. His phone hadn't rung in hours. Not since the networks began playing the leaked footage on loop. Not since a former associate, the producer, who once managed his international tours, released a statement. "I stayed quiet for 17 years. I can't anymore." What happened to her wasn't a one-time thing. He didn't read the rest. The knock on the door came at 4:12 p.m., not loud, not aggressive, just final. The kind of knock that doesn't ask for permission, it delivers inevitability. When the door opened, 2 agents stood there. Suits crisp, eyes unreadable. One of them held a plain envelope. "Mr. Combs," he said, "we need you to come with us." There was no warrant in hand yet, no cuffs, just protocol. But everyone in the room knew what this was, the beginning of the end. Diddy nodded, said nothing, slipped on his watch reflex, not purposing, stepped into the hallway. This time, there were no sunglasses, no entourage, no press, waiting outside. Just the long walk down 3 brownstone steps into a waiting black SUV with no logo and government plates. As the car pulled away, one of the agents opened a manila folder and read aloud the preliminary charges being considered. His voice was calm, like he was reading whether Count 1, conspiracy to obstruct justice. Count 2, witness tampering. Count 3, use of interstate communication facilities to facilitate unlawful activity. Count 4, Diddy didn't react. Not then, but something inside shifted. A muscle near his jaw locked. His fingers, resting on his knee, curled slightly inward. He looked out the window, not at the passing traffic or skyline, but at his reflection. And for a moment, it wasn't the mogul he saw, not the producer, not the name in gold, just a man who had finally become smaller than his secrets. The SUV didn't go to the courthouse. Not this time. It turned downtown, crossed under the FDR Drive, and pulled into the entrance of a federal holding facility. Temporary, administrative, cold. There would be no mugshot yet, no press release. But inside those walls, prosecutors were preparing. The next step, not a trial, a takedown. And the first domino had already fallen. The door shut behind him with a sound too heavy for its size. It wasn't slammed, he just closed with purpose. Deliberate. Diddy sat in the small, windowless room, across from a steel table bolted to the ground. One chair, no clock, no paperwork on the surface, just time. And the 2 agents who followed him. Their expressions sharpened by exhaustion and certainty. They didn't ask if he was comfortable. They didn't start with questions. One of them sat, the other leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching like a witness to something inevitable. "You know why you're here?" The first one said. Diddy said nothing. The agent slid a folder. Across the table, thick, unlabeled inside, a list of names, one by one, highlighted, some familiar, some haunting, some already in custody. At the bottom of the page, a single sentence. "We already have 3 of them talking." He didn't reach for the file. He didn't look at the list. But his silence shifted. Not in defiance and dread, because silence wasn't a shield anymore, it was evidence. The second agent finally spoke. Not aggressively, not even sternly. Just like someone explaining what comes next. "Here's what you need to understand, Mr. Combs. This isn't about one leaked file or a rogue security guard. This is about a pattern, a system. And that system has started speaking without you." He finally looked up, just briefly. "So what do you want?" he asked. Not sharp, not cocky. Just tired. The agent leaned forward. "We want to know how far it went. We want the names, the wires, the meetings, the ones no one documented because you didn't need to. You kept it off paper, off record. We know the shape of it. We want the skeleton." Outside the room, in a sealed wing of the same facility, a former tour manager named Rhonda Webb was being debriefed. She had brought her own files, time-stamped flight logs, expense reports from untraceable budgets. She hadn't spoken publicly in 10 years, but now, with immunity on the table, she spoke in full color. "I used to joke that we weren't managing concerts," she said. "We were managing narratives, lies, keeping the story clean while the mess stayed buried." When asked about asset reversal strategy, she didn't blink. "Oh, that was real," she said. "It was like a playbook. First rule, no mess touches the star. Not unless the star gives the green light." Back in the room with Diddy, another document was placed on the table. An NDA, his initials signed. At the bottom, the agent pointed. "We know this wasn't the only one, and we know some were paid through that Dubai shell." He exhaled slowly. Not shock, not denial. Just the first crack in the armor. He hadn't even realized he still wore. "This, all of this," he began, then stopped. He looked at the mirror behind the agents. The one he knew was two-way. "If I talk, I lose everything." The agent didn't blink. "If you don't, you lose everything." Faster, there was a beat. Then another. Finally, he leaned forward. "I never wanted to hurt people," he said. "I just didn't want to lose. I didn't know how to stop once the machine got big." The agent nodded once. "That's not a confession. That's a beginning." Outside, another name had just flipped. A bodyguard from 2006. He'd walked into a field office that morning with a thumb drive and a name no one had expected. The Foundation Lists, a document that allegedly ranked media targets, potential threats, and former partners by risk level with color-coded notes beside each one. Green, keep happy. Yellow, neutralize. Red, remove. And near the top of the red list, Malik Rayner. By the end of the day, 2 new warrants had been signed. Not for Diddy, for people still in the industry. People who never left the game. People who thought the spotlight was enough to blind the truth. They were wrong, and the walls were closing in. It wasn't just the music anymore. That's what made it terrifying. It wasn't about the verses, the beats, or the after-parties. It was the infrastructure behind it. Studios that were fronts. Tour companies doubling as financial funnels. Legal teams trained not in defense, but in disappearance. And now, it was all unraveling, floor by floor, inbox by inbox. At 6:03 a.m. in a glass-tinted Hi-Rise in Beverly Hills, federal agents knocked on the door of a man listed in court documents only as Subject Zeta, his real name, Ration Carter, executive producer of a multi-platinum streaming platform and one of Diddy's oldest confidants. When he answered the door, barefoot, holding a coffee mug that read King, he wasn't surprised. He took your time, he said. Inside his office, agents found encrypted backups, external drives, and an unfiled email thread that would hit headlines before noon. The Dubai file's a mess. If that leaks, we're ALL on tape. Make sure they shut Malik down. Quiet, Malik. Rayner wasn't quiet anymore. Now, under federal protection, Malik had become the keystone. What started as whispers in recording studios had turned into sworn depositions, location-tagged photos, wire transfers, and a confidential list of every hush agreement he had been told to coordinate. The news channels hadn't even caught up yet, but the feds had. In a sealed conference room just a few miles from where Diddy now sat under observation. 3 names sat circled in red on a whiteboard. Ration Carter, asset manager Kendra Hall, digital silence consultant Lana West, media risk director. Currently in hiding, Lana had run the media buffer team. She wasn't just crisis management, she was the ghostwriter of denials, the architect of silence. When TMZ got quiet, Lana made a call. When a model's lawsuit disappeared, Lana rewrote the script, and now, her name had resurfaced in an email chain timestamped 2 weeks before. The courtroom leaks. Keep the court blind. Keep combs clean. I'll pull the Dubai doc when it's safe. But it was never safe. The Dubai document had already reached a second grand jury, and they weren't interested in music. They were building a case called DOH Operation Reversal, a coordinated investigation into the entertainment industry's use of black-budget shell companies to suppress witnesses, silence threats, and manipulate litigation outcomes before cases even hit courtrooms. At the center of the whiteboard, a printout photo of Diddy, no longer smiling, no longer crowned. Just connected. 20-8 lines of connection radiated from his name. Every red thread now led to someone willing to talk, and every person willing to talk pointed to someone still hiding. But not for long. At 2:44 p.m., federal marshals executed simultaneous search warrants in Atlanta, home of a retired tour driver turned bagman. Miami, where an offshore lawyer's vacation home had served as a burner office. Zurich, a bank account with no name, but a recurring deposit labeled MRC Loyalty. By sundown, prosecutors had filed for the first coordinated multi-state indictment of its kind in the entertainment industry, not just against Diddy, but against the system that protected him. And somewhere, in an anonymous safehouse, Malik Rayner watched it all unfold on a muted television. His eyes were steady, his hands trembling just slightly, because he knew what was next. They weren't just going to dismantle Diddy, they were going to expose the formula. It wasn't written anywhere. It wasn't in emails, contracts, or burner notes. Plan Gray was verbal, whispered, reserved, for when every firewall had burned down and the courtroom stopped being predictable. When names like Diddy or Carter were no longer shields but magnets for subpoenas. That's when Lana moved. She was the mind behind the curtain. The one who convinced Alisters to say nothing, even when silence roared louder than truth. If someone vanished from the news cycle, Lana was the eraser. If court documents were suddenly retracted, she knew the judge's hobby before they ruled. She didn't work in law or press, she worked in leverage, and now she was on the run. The last confirmed footage of her was from a private airfield in Mallorca, boarding a jet with no tail number. She didn't take luggage, just a charcoal gray coat and a leather satchel she never let go of. Inside that satchel, a single flash drive that contained a directory titled Primary Blind, password protected, rumored to contain backup blackmail, materials on 10 high-profile figures including 2 U.S. senators and the former CEO of a major streaming platform. Some say it was Lana's insurance, others say it was her exit strategy, but the Department of Justice didn't care about rumors anymore. By the time the footage hit Interpol's internal servers, her profile was stamped Strategic Manipulator, Witness Tampering, Tier 1. Her mistake: she left behind a single burner phone. In it, a half-deleted voice message. Tell SC not to talk. Not even in a plea. Dubai cannot surface in full, or we all burn. If I'm hit, you activate line, echo, SC. Sean Combs, the prosecutors, already had the pieces. Now they had the wire. Inside the federal holding facility, Diddy sat alone again. No phone, no lawyer present, just a video screen. A loop playing over and over Lana's voice, and the silence that followed. They didn't ask him questions, they just played the loop. Again and again. After the third round, he looked up. So she's gone. No reply. He smirked. Just barely. She always said she'd leave before the game did, but the game was no longer in anyone's hands. The operation that once controlled perception, that bent headlines, silenced names, and flooded the internet with distractions, had cracked open. And in its place, Operation Line Echo. A sealed federal program designed to track coordinated manipulation of judicial outcomes by entertainment elites. It had one goal: to force the final dominoes to fall. By nightfall, three things happened. A court in Nevada unsealed a sealed deposition from 2019, a lawsuit involving an intern, an unreleased documentary, and suppressed footage from an overseas yacht trip. The DA in New York confirmed an upcoming grand jury hearing to consider obstruction charges tied to Lana West. Diddy's legal team withdrew its final motion for dismissal, and inside the courtroom, where it all started, the bench sat empty. Just polished wood, cold light, and the hum of fluorescent tubes. No more image, no more myth. Just echoes. Because now, everyone who once whispered was being heard. It happened on a Tuesday. Quiet, gray, and unspectacular. But inside a soundproofed federal lab beneath Washington, D.C., something shifted, the kind of shift that doesn't echo in headlines until weeks later. After reputations have collapsed and handlers stop answering phones, the Dubai archive had decrypted, not through brute force, not through hacking, through access. Someone gave up the password. They still don't know who. All that was clear was this: a secure signal hit the DOJ's servers at 3:11 a.m. Eastern, a code 6 characters, meaningless to most. But to the right terminal, it opened 2.4 terabytes of buried contracts, anonymized accounts, hush money flows, psychological profiles, influencer engagement maps, and a ledger titled Confirmed Influence Assets. Sean Combs was line 17, but there were 186 names: politicians, executives, YouTubers, 3 Supreme Court clerks, 2 retired federal judges, an actress who'd once gone viral for speaking truth. All tracked, all managed. Some unknowingly, some very knowingly. At the center of the system, Project Miralite, a strategic influence operation funded through offshore holdings tied to the entertainment industrial complex. Its mission: control, narrative, gravity. Every case is winnable if no one knows what happened. The files revealed how Lana West built it. One document in particular, a 22-slide internal training deck titled The Algorithm of Doubt: How to Bury Truth Without Telling a Single Lie. It read like a manifesto, or a weapon manual. Slide for simply read. Never silence the truth. Just surround it. Inside Diddy's cell, he sat with a printout of slide 4 on the table. He didn't say a word. The DOJ hadn't charged him with anything new yet. They didn't need to, because with every decrypted contract, every transaction tagged to his name, every timestamp aligning too perfectly with his calendar entries, the case wasn't expanding, it was collapsing inward. Faster, sharper, final. And then, they played the final tape. Audio, not video. A recording from a hotel suite in Zurich, just days before the first trial date. Lana's voice again: if the archive falls, don't panic. We built this to outlive us. But Combs, he needs it to survive. That makes him the weakest point. That tape changed everything. Diddy wasn't the architect anymore. He was the fuse. The distraction, the face of something he didn't fully control, and the people he thought he'd protected. They'd already started stepping away. Quietly, legally, strategically. By morning, 5 of his closest allies had filed immunity deals in exchange for full testimony. They all pointed back to the archive. By noon, the press had it. Not the full dump, just a leak. 1 PDF. Project Miralite. Known participants encrypted. By 4 p.m., the Senate Judiciary Committee had called for a federal inquiry into entertainment industry corruption, but none of that reached Diddy. He was already gone, not vanished, just absent. After lunch, the marshals entered his observation room to find nothing but an empty chair, a folded copy of that training slide, and 6 words handwritten on the wall above it in pen. They spun silence into power. I obeyed. A national manhunt began within hours. But some whispered he wouldn't run. He'd wait, just like he always had. Because in a system designed to protect image over truth, sometimes the final move isn't escape, it's release. They found her in Lagos, but not where they expected. Not in a penthouse. Not in a fortified embassy corridor. Lana West was barefoot, seated in a shaded outdoor cafe, overlooking a dusty intersection where children ran between market stalls and stray dogs napped beneath umbrellas. She wasn't hiding, she was waiting. When the Interpol agents approached, she didn't flinch or reach. She slid her satchel across the table, opened it slowly, and revealed a single silver key and a printed envelope marked, "For the committee." They cuffed her gently, almost respectfully. She didn't ask for a lawyer, she asked for a piano. No one understood the request. She was placed under immediate extradition protocol and flown to Washington. The satchel, secured in a reinforced briefcase, was handed directly to a black-suited courier escorted by a federal convoy. But what mattered wasn't the key or the file. It was her silence. Lana West, the architect of Mirrorlight, the queen of invisible pressure, said nothing, not during boarding, not during landing, not during processing. She only whispered once, during fingerprinting, to a confused intern who later resigned without explanation. She said, "You don't kill the system, you reveal who it protects." Meanwhile, the world hunted for Diddy. News anchors speculated on sightings from Morocco to Montana. Anonymous tips flooded hotlines. Some believed he'd been taken out by the very elites he once protected. Others thought he was still in the country, beneath a different name, a different face. But the truth was simpler. He was never far. He was already booked under a new identity, held in a private room beneath the Capitol, placed in federal protective oversight not as a criminal, but now, paradoxically, as a witness. The government didn't want to try him anymore. They wanted to use him, leverage him, open the archive, not with subpoenas, but with a voice that had once whispered into it, because the files were real. But the explanations, they needed a narrator. Someone who had watched it unfold in boardrooms, on yachts, in hotel suites, with burner phones and NDAs thicker than books. Diddy was that voice. They gave him but one truth, and the machine might bleed. He sat in a private hearing room, across from a Senate subcommittee armed with transcripts, timelines, contracts, and forensic analysts. But what they didn't have was the rhythm, the flow, the why. And that's what he gave them. Not loudly, not confidently, but like a man who no longer needed to run from the reflection staring back. He said it began in 2016, not with a threat, but with a favor. A friend called, said a story might drop, suggested he speak to a woman named Lana. That meeting changed everything. She didn't offer protection. She offered invisibility. She said, "We can't stop the tide, but we can drown the cameras." And she did, one by one. Tabloids were redirected. Allegations buried. Witnesses disappeared into quiet settlements handled offshore. In return, he gave her trust, money, and eventually obedience. The committee didn't interrupt. They let it pour. The way events bent around a few key firms, the untraceable PR blitzes, the data teams that prepped psychological profiles on potential jurors months before trials even began. It wasn't corruption, Diddy said, it was choreography. His voice cracked only once when he described the folder labeled Ghost Index. It contained the names of people who'd refused and pushed back, who were erased not with violence, but with silence. Career-ending edits, lost deals, viral takedowns with no source. You don't need bullets when you have belief, he said, and we owned the belief. When the session ended, no one spoke for a full minute. The lead senator closed the folder in front of him and said, "This doesn't end with you." Diddy nodded. It never did. As news of the testimony leaked, the world began to split, not politically, not culturally, but spiritually. A reckoning of belief, because if Mirrorlight was real, then so were its victims, and so were the myths it protected. The world didn't just ask who else was involved. It asked, how long had the truth been a brand, priced, packaged, and resold? Lana West, still held in isolation, requested only one thing after Diddy's testimony aired. She asked to hear it, alone, in full. When it ended, she laughed. Just once, then whispered, finally, a worthy bit. No one knew what she meant, but everyone knew what came next. The cameras weren't supposed to be there. It was a closed hearing, sealed and off the record. But someone leaked the stream. Not the raw feed, but a clean-cut version, edited with no music, no cuts, no voiceover. Just Diddy, alone under soft white lights, answering the questions America hadn't dared to ask. His voice was calm, almost too calm. He wasn't defensive, he wasn't proud, he just was. The world stopped to listen. Not because they believed him, but because for once, he wasn't selling them anything. You ever wonder why some stories disappear? He asked. Why a case vanishes after trending for 2 days? Why a hashtag dies when it should catch fire? He didn't wait for an answer. We built that. We funded silence. The room was frozen. His words weren't poetic. They were mechanical, precise, like he'd practiced them for years but never said them out loud. He named firms, not just Lana's, others, known names, blue-chip PR companies, strategic advisory boards, crisis managers. One by one, he listed 19. Then paused. That's not even half. He said Mirrorlight wasn't unique, just more efficient. It had software, patterns, contingency scripts, every scenario you fear. We wrote the response 3 months earlier, he said. Fear is just market research. The recording spread across social media like wildfire. First in 15-second clips, then in hour-long breakdowns. Then, in Congress, the full 3-hour testimony was shown on every major news network in primetime. It wasn't just about Diddy anymore. It was about the system. The real system. The one beneath the headlines. A coalition of silence powered by image, fear, and timing. And Lana West. She watched it from a concrete cell lined with steel. No windows. No mirrors. Only a small speaker in the ceiling and a flickering surveillance light. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. When the feed ended, she stood up, walked to the door, and whispered, "Now it begins." 2 hours later, the DOJ's mainframe was breached. Not by hackers. From within, over 300,000 files began copying to a secure drive placed inside a courier vehicle already en route to The Hague. It was sanctioned, legal, approved under International Treaty Clause 47b, emergency release in the public interest. The US government didn't block it. They couldn't, because by then, they weren't in control. The public was. Whistleblowers surfaced in London, in Cape Town, in Rio, each with fragments of the Mirrorlight framework, copies, drafts, debriefs, voice memos, receipts, and they all said the same thing. We were told the truth was unprofitable. Diddy didn't return to the public eye. Not exactly. He didn't give interviews, he didn't post, he didn't tweet. But once a week, at the same hour, he sat in a federal studio and gave sworn testimony. One room, one table, one truth at a time. No lawyers, just memory. He spoke of the first blackmail fund, the real origin of hush settlements, the influencer surveillance protocols, how they targeted journalists with manufactured scandals, how they chose who rose and who vanished. By month 3, he wasn't the only one. A hedge fund VP came forward. Then a former intelligence officer. Then a senator. Not to defend him, but to agree. To confirm, to collapse the myth from inside. Lana West remained silent, but not still. She was moved to a protected witness site. Rumors said she had begun writing. A memoir, a guide, a confession. No one knew the title. Some said it was already finished. All anyone ever saw was the first line, leaked in a blurry photo of a redacted cover page. It said, "You trusted the screen. We built the screen." The old world didn't burn. It fractured, quietly, relentlessly, because when the illusion falls, there's no explosion, just light. And in that light, the empire they built, the silence they sold, could finally be seen. Not with anger, but with understanding. The trial never ended, because it was never just a trial, it was a mirror. Weeks after the last testimony, a letter surfaced. It wasn't leaked. It wasn't published. It was mailed to one recipient. Handwritten in ink that bled slightly on thick ivory paper. No logo, no return address. Just a sentence on the outside of the envelope. To the one still watching. The recipient, a journalist. The only one who had followed the Mirrorlight thread before it was cool, before it was real, before it nearly cost her everything. Maya Imani fired, blacklisted, threatened, forgotten. Until now. She opened the letter carefully. Inside was only a note and a photograph. The note read, "You were right. Start again." The photo, a younger Diddy, sitting beside a man in military fatigues, somewhere in Sierra Leone. Date stamped, 1999. The man was smiling. Diddy wasn't. And scrawled on the back, in Lana West's signature handwriting, "The first test." Maya froze. She had seen this man before, not in any case file, but at the funeral of a West African diplomat who died mysteriously in 2002. The story had never added up. And now, it made terrible sense. Mirrorlight didn't start in Hollywood. It started in the shadows of proxy wars, aid contracts, and mineral rights. Before it became an image machine, it was an influenced operation, born in conflict, tested in silence. Maya didn't hesitate. She didn't call her editor. She didn't run a story. She vanished. 1 week later, a podcast episode titled "The First Test" dropped on a secure feed known only to a handful of investigative researchers and watchdogs. The story wasn't polished. It was raw, scratchy audio, nervous breath, quiet rage, but it was real. And it named names no one had ever connected before. Diddy, Lana, a former CIA front company, a missing child soldier turned billionaire arms broker. It painted a map not of conspiracies, but of patterns. The kind that repeat when no one watches long enough to connect them. The episode was downloaded 18 million times in 48 hours. Then the platform it was hosted on went offline, permanently, but the file had already spread. Mirrors everywhere. Encrypted drives. Torrent networks. Whispered transfers. The kind of story no one could kill anymore. Lana West was never seen. Again, rumors claimed she died in Montenegro. Others said she returned to a farm in Senegal. One said she was quietly absorbed into a UN shadow bureau, trading silence for silence. But her final quote appeared carved into the wall of an abandoned data facility in Finland, discovered by a cleanup crew. Control is a myth. Belief is not. As for Diddy, the government no longer protected him. Not after the South African contract surfaced. He was relocated to a safe house in Greenland. No communication, no press, no legacy. His name slowly disappeared from music charts, from retrospectives, even from scandal compilations. It was as if the world agreed to let the myth evaporate. But every now and then, a strange signal would echo through secure online channels, a voice, his voice, repeating the same phrase. Perception was the only product. Now you own it. The age of curated silence was over, but the price of truth was only beginning. And in the shadows of every screen, every breaking headline, every viral redemption arc, someone was still watching. There was no press conference, no applause, no redemption arc, just silence. A different kind of silence, not the one Mirrorlight sold, not the one Diddy weaponized, but the kind that arrives when the story is finally over and there's nothing left to spin. The courtroom had long emptied, the cameras had long powered down, the news cycles moved on, as they always do. New scandals replaced the old, new names took center stage. But the shadow of what happened remained, not as a headline, not as a verdict, but as a warning. Diddy never stood trial again. He never gave another interview. His empire, once draped in platinum and power, became a case study in every ethics class, every journalism school, every dark office where reputations are managed with algorithms and fear. The documents were archived, the files sealed, but the memory lived, not in courts, not in laws, but in people. And every time someone asks why the truth feels so late, they praise. Remembered this, not all trials end with a gavel. Some end with a mirror. And when you finally look in it,